Today we're going to talk about urge surfing from a Torah and halachic perspective. Now, there is this term called urge surfing, which was coined by Alan Marlett, and it was a system he devised to help addicts who are recovering to cope with their addictive urges. But the truth is, it's useful for any kind of very strong urge and compulsion. And people who are working on Shmiras Einayim or Shmiras Bris and other ideas like that, it is a very useful system and technique, which we're going to talk about it, and then we're also going to talk about it from a Hashkafic point of view, what it might mean Jewishly, and add some of my own thoughts to the issue. Now, urge surfing itself is a kind of CBT technique, and it's based on the recognition that you have to know what you're fighting. If you're fighting a craving, that's futile, because cravings come for all kinds of reasons, and they're physiological and they're emotional, and they're quite difficult to manage once they're there. And how they come and why they come is for all kinds of complex reasons, just like why we think or feel anything, which is oftentimes beyond our conscious accessibility. So the idea with urge surfing is to think of urges as if they're waves. They're waves in the ocean, waves that you surf. You don't try to fight a wave. You could imagine what it's like to start fighting with a tsunami. You can't fight a wave. You need to find a way to flow with the wave. And the basic principle of urge surfing is trying to find a way that a person can operate and process and work with the feelings that they're having, and especially cravings and very powerful impulses, without necessarily acting on them. And that's the key, because most of the time people get involved in trying to fight the impulse itself and trying to fight the urge. Now, you could decide what you're going to do about it, but it's very, very hard to eliminate the urge itself. And let me give an example of the value of knowing that something can be done and how to do it. Imagine, you lived in the 1600s or the 1700s. You're a brilliant physicist. You're Sir Isaac Newton, and then someone shows you a bicycle. Now, footnote: bicycles, I think, were invented in the early 1800s. So someone shows you a bicycle and says, you can get on that thing and balance on it and ride it. And, no matter how brilliant you are, you wouldn't believe it for a second. You would say, that's nuts. Get on that thing with those little thin tires and ride it? Come on, what are you talking about? But yet, the minute you would see somebody else ride it and see that it could be done, and you realize it could be done, you start to develop a different relationship to the challenge, and you begin to develop techniques because you believe you can do it. And then you get on that bicycle, and after trial and error, you're able to ride it. And we live in a culture and in a society that has many vested interests to have us believe that we will be unhappy, in fact, we'll be miserable if we try to fight our urges, and not only that, but we cannot. And this is I think, a very damaging idea. And it's just simply not true. However, it is true, and this is part of where it came to be because of certain psychological insights. It is true that if you overly repress any type of idea or thought, it will oftentimes end up hurting you or hurting others in kind of like a backward way. It'll come up in different ways and come out at the wrong time or in the wrong way. So the idea of urge surfing is not to deny the urge and not to deny the reality of the sensations, but it's more about developing the proper relationship with it, kind of like riding a bicycle, that you can ride, you can roll with something, quite literally, you can roll with something and learn how to work with it, and that's okay. So it's important to really take that in. that you have to erase a certain kind of programming and a certain kind of relating with yourself through experience, that you can't manage an urge, but you could. But you're not going to get rid of the urge. You're going to live with the urge very differently. Another important thing to keep in mind is that we are taught, as if you're a religious person, often you're taught that there's something in Jewish philosophy called Milchemas HaYetzer, the fight against the Yetzer Hara, the war against the Yetzer Hara. But here's the thing they don't tell you, which is that if you make yourself into a battlefield, that's very, very messy. You can't fight a war all the time. It's just not possible. The best way to think of it is if you're driving a car down the road, it's very important to have guardrails, both in case of an emergency, that you might drive off the cliff and it's good to bang into the guardrails instead of driving off the cliff, but also to center yourself. So the guardrails serve two functions. They're a centering mechanism where you're staying far away from the guardrails, but it helps you understand that you need to have those guardrails, and it helps you stay far away from them. And then there's also, in an emergency, okay, you bang against the guardrails and it keeps you from driving off the cliff. The way that I think is psychologically appropriate, and we'll talk about Jewish Hashkafa shortly, but the way that's psychologically appropriate to think about is that the guardrail is that the war that you're having with your desires, with your passions, with your impulses, with your compulsions, you cannot have that war in that fashion where you're banking up against the guardrail. That's not good driving. That's really bad driving. You have to drive down the road in such a way that you're far away from the guardrails and that you're driving smoothly and you know the guardrails are there. So once in a while, if you're totally at your wit's end and you've reached a point where you're about to cave, as the Midrashim say about Yosef HaTzadik, at the last minute he had a vision of his father, and he didn't want to disappoint his father, and he didn't want to feel that he disqualified himself in some fundamental way. So at the last minute he was able to resist. And there's other Midrashim, similar, different ways in which Yosef went through heroic means, and even in some ways didn't totally succeed, but succeeded largely in managing his passion at the last minute. But the point is, that's when you're banging on the guardrails. That's Milchemas HaYetzer. But you can't live like that all the time. So let's get into some of the philosophy and the techniques of urge surfing. So the first is to just, instead of fighting the sensation, is to actually get acquainted. Right? There's an ancient Chinese proverb, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Even the parts within yourself that you might be at war with or you might seek to fight, maybe it's better first to even to get to know it. So when you feel this urge in your body, try to understand and just notice it. Don't go into it deeply as where you're overtaken physically by it, viscerally, because again, that's going too deep into the feeling. But allow yourself to simply notice it as if you're kind of observing yourself. And how does it feel? Where do you feel it? What does it feel like? Is it an intensity? Is it a heat? Is it a certain weight in the body? Is it a pressure in the head? Is it something in the stomach? Simply notice it. And then see if you could just spend a minute or two. It's useful to set a timer, actually, because a minute's a long time. Try to set like a minute to just simply feel the feeling. Just say to yourself, I could observe and notice and feel the sensation. So whatever it is, a huge pressure, however the compulsive, impulsive force affects you, just allow yourself to sit with it for a minute. And then you might also let yourself just notice like the power of it. How strong is it? Coming in waves? Is it getting stronger? Is it getting weaker? Is it waning? And these types of ideas can really help you learn how to manage it. And I can assure you that it will pass. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to come back. In fact, when you're trying to develop a different relationship with a very strong urge, it might come back in 5 minutes, it might come back in an hour, it might come back in a day, but it will likely come back. And you need to take the same, attitude toward it. Getting really acquainted, noticing it, feeling it, set the timer to just allow yourself to see how it goes and feel the waves, feel it come and go. Now, that's some aspects of urge surfing, although there are other aspects to the technique. I personally don't relate to those other techniques. You can look it up because there's plenty of literature online about it. But I'd like to add something in terms of the Jewish focus. There's an interesting. It's not really a medrash. It's a medrash in the sense that it's a story. It's an agada, but it doesn't come directly from the Gemara. You can find it in the Ran on the Darim on Daf Nun Amud Beis, and the Ran discusses a story about Rabbi Akiva and how there was a woman who, really in a hostile way, she was angry at him, but she wanted to seduce him, and in her attempt to seduce him, Rabbi Akiva reacts in a very interesting way. Rabbi Akiva, I don't want to go into all the aspects of the story, but in one part of the story, he cries, and the woman is bewildered by his behavior, and she asks, "Why did you cry? Why were you crying?" And he says, "Because Hai Shurfa de Bala Ba'ara, this beauty that one day is going to be in the ground." Now, there's a couple ways to look at that. Obviously, in a more simple level, Rabbi Akiva is reminding himself that even the most beautiful and attractive woman, is mortal as anybody else, and she will end up being dead just like him. And so that allowed him perhaps to consider his priorities. And that's valid. But there's something else, I think, that you can take from that story too. Rabbi Akiva notices her beauty. He is not denying that she's beautiful. And I think that intuitively, Rabbi Akiva was engaged in a kind of sublimation. And what sublimation means is, it means that you do not take a feeling and eradicate it. Instead, you find a way to direct it. Now, when you see somebody beautiful and you feel perhaps a very strong lust or sexual urge, this in of itself is really a part of life. It's really actually beautiful. Why should we not? I hope we never, ever stop feeling that power and that wish for love and for connection and for union. And of course, we all know, if you haven't studied it yet, there is so much erotic symbolism in Kabbalah, because the rabbis and the mystics understood something this powerful, something this great, something that energizes and draws all of us. It has to be godly. Okay, misdirected, it's the opposite. But that's true about anything. Anything that's misused and misdirected is the opposite almost of its purpose. So of course, promiscuity and just empty, selfish lust is not godly. But the power itself, our urge for life, literally to reproduce, to procreate, to generate, our urge to connect, our urge for love and affection, this is all, not only is it understandable and should be tolerated, it should be celebrated. And part of this way that I'd like you to consider in terms of how you adapt the urge surfing is to feel the beauty, is to feel the love, is to understand that, okay, so there's a very tasty snack there, in the refrigerator that you'd like to eat. It's really tasty. It really is. It's yummy. There's no denying it. You still could decide whether or not you're going to eat it. You really don't have to eat it. But the feeling itself is a very important feeling. It's about needing to eat, needing something sweet, wanting to be alive. So part of the urge surfing technique that I would adapt, although it's not strictly speaking the author's intention, is you can allow yourself to feel all that power and to enjoy. And here's something odd and to think about as well. Why is it that if we're chasing after something, it doesn't matter what it is, but when we're chasing after that thing, the fact that we don't have it is even more exciting. The power, the enjoyment we get from the chase is very powerful. So, yet in our relationships, if we feel denied or frustrated by our spouses, all of a sudden we're angry and bitter and resentful, even though we're also trying for something, whether we have to achieve a better level of communication, a better kind of understanding, whether we need to be more vulnerable, whether we have to try to engage our spouse and understand what's missing here, share what our needs are, try to understand what the other person's needs are, whatever that is. Why is that struggle, why is that adventure not empowering and enriching and exciting? Yet if we're chasing after some other person, only that's exciting. What's going on there? So it's important to view the challenges that we have and the wishes that we have for things and direct them appropriately, because there's tremendous power. There's tremendous, when you feel that wish and that urge and whatever it means to you. Again, I think for each person it's a little bit different, but it's definitely about life and connection and love. Allow yourself to feel it and feel it in a big and good way. Well, then, you have to figure out, part of it is being able to draw power and strength from it. Part of it is to figure out, well, how do you find a way to really live with that in a good way? And even if for whatever reason a person may feel they'll never fully be able to fulfill that, maybe they're not married, or maybe they're in a marriage that's so problematic that it seems out of reach, that ever the real need for love or affection or connection, the real life-giving qualities of a relationship can't be achieved, which is really awful. And if a person is single, they really have to think about what can be done. And if they're married and the marriage is that defective, it also requires thought what to do about it. But even so, the feeling itself and the wish itself, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill you. It's actually going to make you stronger and more powerful to learn how to feel it and to live it, and really to thank God that you have it, because that gives you all the energy that you need. And you could almost, if you allow yourself to feel it in your body, instead of being frustrated that for whatever reason right now the urge can't be met. Doesn't matter whether it's an urge for a piece of chocolate cake or it's an urge for another tasty treat. If you just allow yourself to know and feel the power in that urge, and that you can understand you don't have to obey it. There's a stupid advertising campaign from years ago, I think it was from Sprite, obey your thirst. No, don't obey your thirst. Listen to your thirst, respect your thirst, love your thirst, appreciate your thirst, draw power from your thirst. You don't have to obey your thirst.